Hello, I'm Sean of the Lore Hunter. In this video, I'm talking about what are hands down my favorite aspects of the 2019 action-platformer Blasphemous, the atmosphere and the world building. From the moment I saw the E3 2019 trailer, I was hooked. The game looked like a cross between metal album art come to life and hyperbolically Catholic imagery that took me back to my days of playing Warhammer 40k. After playing the game, I can attest that these elements exist in spades. But the world of Cvstodia and how it was created has more going on than that. The thesis upon which Blasphemous was created is described by level designer Enrique Collinet, who says, "We had this question in 2016 of how a game based on Spanish folklore would look to the eyes of people outside of Spain. We have seen this a lot in Japanese games, Chinese games, games made in Sweden or Norway with Viking styles, so we were thinking of how a game based on our folklore would work." Blasphemous developer The Game Kitchen is based in southern Spain in the city of Seville, and their hometown culture and history is the foundation upon which the world of Cvstodia is built. Christian Holy Week is a major cultural celebration in southern Spain that goes back to the Middle Ages, in which elaborate processions are held. In these processions, some participants wear penitential robes with a hat called a capirote that will look very familiar to anyone who's played Blasphemous. In The Art of Blasphemous, it is explained that the idea of the helmet hood, based upon the unique penitential vestment of Spain, was created anecdotally in search of a unique look for the main character. Not taken seriously at first, the look stuck, and the idea of basing it on this Holy Week garb unique to Spain was an idea that would even become the key that would lead the Game Kitchen to base the entire artistic section of the game on the culture and folklore of southern Spain. The result is that the world of Cvstodia is a fever dream of references to Inquisition-era Spain and Spanish folklore, art, music, and architecture. The Game Kitchen CEO Mauricio Garcia explained that Seville is a place which is a particularly very religious place. We have a lot of traditions. We were the headquarters for the Spanish Inquisition back then for many years, and we have a lot of creepy old stories that we can use for our game. So this game is actually very personal for us because it's about making something cool with all this ancient heritage we have in terms of legends and iconography and cultural things. The lore of Cvstodia is a curated amalgamation of Spain's darkest historical events and folklore. One of the most fascinating, read as horrifying, discoveries in digging into these inspirations was how close they adhered to the real stories at times. In Blasphemous, the Covenant of Our Lady of the Charred Visage is a convent of nuns in which they must burn half of their face and cover up the other half with a golden mask in order to join. The Lady of the Charred Visage, afflicted by the miracle, has been turned into a giant whose burns never heal. This was inspired by Maria Coronel. Maria was a 14th century aristocrat who caught the attention of King Pedro I, aka Pedro the Cruel. He wanted her as his lover, but she was not about that life. She fled him and ended up at the convent of Santa Clara to take the habits and become a nun. Pedro the Cruel pursued her still, and to rid herself of his attention, she went to the kitchen and poured boiling oil on her face and chest. She went on to found the convent of Saint Ines, and she was buried at her church after a long life. As a weird postscript to this story, her body was found to be oddly well preserved, and you can go visit her tomb in Seville today. One of the most visually unique side stories in the game is that of Altas Gracias. The design of Altas Gracias was actually what started my journey into discovering what inspired the world of Cvstodia, as this egg of hair that hatches this three-faced giant woman is outside of the fantasy tropes that I'm accustomed to. In Blasphemous, three sisters were to be married, but for unknown reasons they did not want to. They prayed to the miracle to intervene, and in response their hair grew and knotted around them until it formed an egg. After the penitent one offers 3 items, Altas Gracias hatches out of the egg as a giant hairy woman with the faces of the 3 sisters. The artbook explains that Altas Gracias was inspired by the tale of Santa Liberata. In the tale, the King of Portugal wants to marry his adopted daughter to the King of Sicily. The daughter does not want to marry the King of Sicily and prays to God to make her undesirable to the king. Her face and body become covered in hair and the King of Sicily breaks off the marriage. The King of Portugal considers this heresy, and the adopted daughter is crucified. The Game Kitchen used the legend as a framework and gave it the blasphemous touch, making it bigger and more bombastic. And in this case, making an egg out of hair. So contrary to the Monty Python sketch, I think everyone who's played Blasphemous expects me to talk about the Spanish Inquisition. The Blasphemous Kickstarter page explains that the game takes place during Custodia's age of corruption. Riddled with frustration at their insufficient devotion, the High Pontiff heaved his golden throne and turned the entire throne back. Years later, the High Pontiff was transformed into a great, withered, and barren tree, and began to burn for 90 days and 90 nights. Once the tree had been entirely consumed by flames, a huge mountain of ash stood in its place, topped by the infamous turned throne, unoccupied and unguarded. The remaining church leadership scrambled upwards to reach the top and assume the throne. But the mountain began to shift beneath their feet, and before long the mountain of ash had swallowed up each and every soul who had been present in the cathedral. From the ashes rose those poor, unfortunate souls who had been swallowed up, transformed into terrible, deformed, and bloodthirsty beasts, wildly aggressive and violent in nature, but with their faith intact. While the Game Kitchen does not explicitly state this, the Church of Custodia turning into monsters and hunting down the faithless sounds like a pretty clear allusion to the Spanish Inquisition. Further reinforcing this, many elements of Custodia are inspired by Inquisition-era Seville. As mentioned previously, the capirote-shaped helmet of the Penitent One and Deo Gracias' capirote are pulled from the vestment worn by penitents during the Holy Week. The capirote was widely used during the Inquisition, prescribed by the Church as a form of public humiliation in which the color of the hood would symbolize the crimes the wearer committed. The weapon wielded by Quercy is also explained in the art book to be inspired by those sentenced by the Inquisition. It consisted of a sword whose blade of fire arises from a wooden statuette in which a condemned man can be sculpted at the mercy of the flames. One of the most interesting connections I made looking into the creation of Custodia was the combined use of Inquisition-era imagery with bullfighting. The Phalaris Bull is an enemy in Blasphemous that wears a bull's mask and chucks harpoons at you. The Phalaris Bull helmet was originally a torture device developed by the Romans, but was revived by the Inquisition. The harpoons this enemy wields are banderillas, ornamental harpoons used in bullfighting. In Blasphemous, the Phalaris Bull enemy pulls these harpoons out of their back and throws them at the Penitent One. The mixed iconography of an Inquisition-employed torture device and a ceremonial weapon used in bullfighting implies details about the world of Custodia purely through visual language. The Church of Custodia not only prescribes gruesome forms of torture like the Phalaris Bull, but it does so in performative ways that dehumanize the penitent. And bullfighting illusions do not end with the Phalaris Bull. This old clergy-looking dude on a floating chair is called the Spear of the Cathedral. On a personal level, I love this enemy because he's so unimposing and weird, and watching him try to get you off his lawn with these impotent pokes is comical. The art book describes the design of this enemy as combining the vestment of a bishop with the ornamental spear used by a bullfighter. And then we have Melquiades, the Exhumed Archbishop, one of my favorite bosses in Blasphemous. According to the art book, this spooky, scary skeleton was based on the jeweled saints from Rome. These saints were exhumed and paraded around Europe, where they were outfitted in jewels and gold. However, the Teller report also observed a striking similarity between Melquiades and the tomb of the famous matador Joselito El Gallo, located in Seville. And looking at it, I'd have to agree. These enemies take the vestment of authority figures in the Catholic Church and mix them with recognizable elements from bullfighting. Without saying anything explicitly, the game takes these real-world icons to paint a pretty clear picture of the relationship between the Church of Custodia and its congregation as one akin to a bullfighter and a bull, which sure adds something to this already evocative image. Shown here is Josinero, who explains that he was born of the moon and of the torment of a brave bull, and from myself, by the grace of the high wills, my holy brethren. His brethren are the children of the moonlight, who the Penitent One frees from cages over the course of the game, and who also return the Penitent One to his pilgrimage after death. The linen of golden thread tells us that the church took the painting of Josinero as if they didn't want anyone laying eyes on it. Between the children of moonlight being caged and the painting of Josinero being hidden, the church does not seem to be a fan of these kids. Cocinero in Spanish history is the name of a famous bull who killed the matador he was up against by stabbing him through the heart. You can see in Cocinero's painting that the tormented bull is pierced with banderillas. Given everything we've just discussed, my theory is that the bull, representing the congregation of the church, is being tormented by the bullfighter, representing the church leadership, and that Cocinero and the Children of Moonlight are feared by the church leadership because they represent the congregation rising up and slaying them. And how do they do this exactly? If you save all 38 children, you get the Campanillero to the Sons of the Aurora. A campanillero is a processional chant. The lore description of this item gives us the chant. We're on our knees, to the ground we look, but if you name us aloud, we'll march in procession to your dawn of punishment, hoping for your exculpation. We're on our knees, to the ground we look, but if your hand rises up, we'll march in procession to your dawn of punishment, hoping for your exculpation. The line I want to focus on is hoping for your exculpation, which basically means they hope the crimes charged against you are removed or forgiven. Endgame spoilers. In the true ending of the game, the penitent one has felt the weight of sin, and overcomes the Ash Mountain and sits atop the throne, ending the age of corruption. I think this is the ultimate goal of the Children of Moonlight, for the penitent one to be exculpated and take the throne, ending the age of corruption. They bring you back to continue your pilgrimage after dying, and will help fight enemies who stand in your way. The church leadership fears their downfall, and so they lock them away and hide art depicting them. While you could parse this narrative strictly in the game, recognizing the Inquisition and bullfighting iconography really drives the point home, and provides a thematic through-line that the game kitchen uses to a great effect to inform enemy designs and provide environmental storytelling that really fleshes out the world. In addition to using the history and folklore of Spain to inspire and inform the lore and narrative, Spanish art, music, and architecture are at the heart of the game's atmosphere. Of all the art that served as inspiration for Blasphemous, the works of 18th century Spanish painter Francisco de Goya are the most influential. Quite a few works by de Goya are cited as inspiration in the art book, with some being used very directly. A Procession of Flagellants is one of the most famous depictions of a penitential procession, and is cited in the art book as inspiring the flagellant-type enemy. Blasphemous has Saturn devouring his son energy all throughout, but is cited specifically for an inspiration for, you guessed it, Jimino's eye. Seriously, that's what they said. The most direct de Goya inspiration comes from his painting The Witch's Flight, which was not only used as inspiration for the Tres Angustias, but also for the design of the Lady of the Six Sorrows. Francisco de Goya was a liberal who wished to reform Spain, and a Procession of Flagellants and The Witch's Flight are both commonly interpreted as being critical of the Church and the acts of violence committed by the Inquisition. Saturn devouring his son was painted by de Goya on his dining room wall as part of a series called The Black Paintings, done during a dark time in the artist's life where he felt pessimistic about himself and the social upheaval happening in Spain during that time. In Blasphemous, the miracle has made manifest the hearts and minds of people in the age of corruption, and the ruinous and bombastic visuals drive home how dire things are. The violence and cruelty of de Goya's images are meant to be repulsive, and Blasphemous uses these images to be, on the one hand, metal as hell, and on the other hand, revulsive, in order to incite a reaction of revulsion from the player at the state of Cvstodia. One of my favorite visuals, the Holy Guardian visages, were inspired by the works of contemporary UK artist Bill Ellis for The Guardians, and the landscape was inspired by the Purgatory engravings of 19th century French artist Gustave Doré. You might be thinking right about now, UK artist Bill Ellis and the French artist Gustave Doré don't sound very Spanish, and you'd be right. While Spanish art served as heavy inspiration for the visuals of Blasphemous, I don't want to dismiss the influence of non-Spanish art. The concept artists pulled far and wide for their inspirations. That being said, the works of Francisco de Goya and other Spanish contemporaries during the Spanish Inquisition established the atmosphere of cruelty and suffering in Blasphemous. Like this portrait by 17th century Spanish artist Diego de Velázquez, entitled Portrait of Innocent X. Well, actually this dude looks fine. I mean, he's not smiling, but he also doesn't look like he's suffering or... Oh my god! Figure with Meat by 20th century Irish artist Francis Bacon is an homage to the portrait of Innocent X, transformed by his nihilistic and bleak style as a commentary on religious authority. The painting is cited as inspiration for Hosinero's painting in the game. A painting that transforms religious authority into a nightmare's visage is already extremely in line with the narrative of Blasphemous, but referencing it in a painting of the force that represents the downfall of the corrupt church's leadership is just... Las Meninas and Head of a Deer by Diego de Velázquez, the artist behind Portrait of Innocent X, are also cited in the game. For this guy. The Garda Infante is one of the most peculiar enemies in the game, and I didn't really get the idea behind this enemy for a while. But after discovering that Figure with Meat was a twist on another de Velázquez painting, it clicked. Taking something and giving it a dark twist is modus operandi for Blasphemous. This game literally makes the embodiment of faith, the miracle, and has it twist and transform people as an integral part of the plot and lore. These paintings by Velázquez, which are relatively positive observations of the Inquisition era, are referenced in a twisted way. This is in contrast to Francisco de Goya's paintings, which show the era from a critical perspective and are used in a pretty unfiltered way as a basis for the atmosphere and perspective of the game. The Garda Infante embodies this contrast, desecrating these romanticized images by Frankensteining them into this monstrosity. I think it would probably be a bit much to claim that the Game Kitchen is trying to make a deep, critical statement about Velázquez's works, but I definitely think they're having some fun taking these divergent views of their history and favoring one and profaning the other. That's right, in my least controversial of statements, I argue that the creators of Blasphemous enjoy the profane. The music and architecture are the most definitively Andalusian elements in Blasphemous. The game's soundtrack, which you've been hearing throughout this video, uses flamenco music, a style that originated in Andalusia and gives it a dark twist to match the atmosphere of the game. The architecture in the game reflects the unique blend of Baroque and Almohad styles unique to Andalusia. Concept artist Jesus Campos stated, "To create the facade of the church, for example, I took the elements from some of the countless Baroque churches that can be found in each city or town in Andalusia and combined them to create a unique design." The alto section of the Cathedral of Cvstodia was aesthetically inspired by the Giralda, a name given to the famous tower of the Cathedral of Seville, which blends the Almohad and Christian styles in a unique way. The Bridge of the Three Calvaries is based on the Puente de Triana Bridge in Seville. Most notably, at least for me, was the Knot of the Three Words area, which was based upon the famous Great Mosque of Cordoba. There are even more examples, but these are emblematic of how Andalusian sites were used in the world of Cvstodia. These are just a handful of examples showcasing how Blasphemous created the world of Cvstodia using Spain's history and culture. The lore was built upon the history and folklore of Spain and given the Blasphemous twist, and Spanish iconography was used to add depth to the environmental storytelling. Spanish art depicting the Inquisition inspired the atmosphere for the Age of Corruption in Cvstodia, and Andalusian music and architecture infused the game with unique sights and sounds. Ultimately, Blasphemous is a love letter to the Game Kitchen's hometown of Seville, and the result is a unique world that stands out from the more generic Western fantasy that I typically see. And that is Cvstodia's creation story. If you're hungry for even more Blasphemous behind-the-scenes content, I highly recommend buying the art book linked in the description below. It is 200 pages of awesome concept art and game design talk, and was a huge resource in making this video. If you want more Blasphemous lore, check out Smotown's videos. His video on the Miracle does a great job explaining what I think is one of the coolest concepts in the game. And finally, if you enjoyed this video, please let me know by doing all of that commenting and liking and subbing and dinging and all that BS. This video is something a bit different for me, but very much tapped into my passion for game design and peeking behind the curtain into the development process, and I had an absolute blast making it. Thanks for watching.